Have you ever noticed that the more spiritually you awaken, the more you begin to distance yourself from certain things, people, places, and even habits that once seemed normal? Well, there's a much deeper reason for this, and what I'm about to tell you will completely change how you understand your own awakening process. It's not a coincidence. It's not a phase. It's your spirit freeing itself, step by step, from the shackles the world created to keep you distracted, tired, and trapped in the same cycle. Spiritually awakened people don't become beings of light overnight. They go through a silent, sometimes painful process of letting go. They abandon behaviors, beliefs, and even parts of themselves that no longer vibrate at the same frequency. And that's exactly what you're going to understand today. The 6 things that spiritually awakened people gradually abandon, and why this process is the clearest sign that your consciousness is expanding. What Alan Watts revealed about this will make you see awakening in a new light, not as something mystical or distant, but as a real transformation that changes how you think, feel, and live. Get ready, because when you understand the reason for these renunciations, you will realize that what seemed like loss is actually liberation. And perhaps, just perhaps, this video will show you that what you are experiencing now is the beginning of something much bigger than you imagine. Now that you understand what really happens in the spiritual awakening process, something has changed within you, and that's no coincidence. The content you just heard showed you that liberation isn't about losing anything. It's about gaining a new life. This awareness is the first step to living with more clarity, strength, and purpose. And when you share this truth, you multiply this transformation. So, like and subscribe to the channel. That's how you keep this energy alive and also help other people awaken as well. Write the word in the comments, freed, to confirm that this truth has already begun to take effect in you. Do you know that feeling when something inside you seems to have started to change, but you don't know exactly what it is? Suddenly, things that used to excite you lose their appeal. Conversations seem empty and you feel a strange urge to get away from everything. It's as if the world remains the same, but you no longer fit in. This is the first sign that your spiritual awakening has begun, and it never starts noisily. It's silent, discreet, and often confusing. At first, it even seems like loneliness, but in reality, it's the beginning of a great liberation. Spiritually awakened people don't wake up one day enlightened, smiling, and with their lives figured out. They go through a process of deconstruction, in which they realize how much they were trapped in illusions and gradually begin to abandon what no longer makes sense. Have you ever felt like you're changing, and that some people around you no longer understand you? This is more common than it seems. Awakening makes you see the world differently. What once seemed like a priority, recognition, money, the opinions of others, begins to lose its value. And not because you suddenly became a saint, but because your consciousness expands and shows you what really matters. It's as if the veil falls and you realize how much you were living on autopilot. From that moment on, nothing is ever the same again. You start questioning everything. Why am I here? What truly makes me happy? Why do I live trying to please everyone? And that's where the magic and the chaos begin at the same time. This phase is uncomfortable because the ego hates losing control. It wants to keep you safe, repeating the same patterns, surrounded by the same people and the same fears. But spiritual awakening is the opposite of that. It pushes you out of your comfort zone. You start to feel different, sometimes even out of place. But it is precisely in this discomfort that growth happens. Alan Watts said that awakening is like waking up from a dream in which you believed you were the character, but discover that you are the dreamer. In other words, you stop living by reacting to the world and begin to observe the world as part of something much bigger. This changes everything. People who go through this process report the same feeling, that of beginning to lose interest in things that were once important. Arguments, judgments, competitions, comparisons, everything seems too small. And the most curious thing is that this happens slowly. You don't wake up one day and say, "That's it, I've changed." It's a process that unfolds over time. One day you realize you no longer feel anger towards the person who hurt you. The next you realize you no longer want to argue to prove you're right. Gradually you become calmer, more observant, and less reactive. And the world, which once seemed so heavy, begins to lose its power over you. And there's an important detail. Spiritual awakening is not an escape from reality. Many people think that being spiritual means living in a state of flux, without problems, just meditating and emanating good energy. But in reality, it's the opposite. Awakening forces you to face the truth head-on, and sometimes that truth hurts. You perceive your own shadows, recognize your weaknesses, and understand that light and darkness are part of the same journey. It is at this moment that you begin to abandon not only what is around you, but also what is inside. Pride, fear, the desire to control everything. This inner cleansing is slow but liberating. Over time, you begin to notice something curious. Situations that once drove you crazy now teach you something. The people who hurt you start to show you something about yourself, and even losses begin to take on a new meaning. It's as if every experience, good or bad, has a hidden message. The awakened one understands that life is not a battlefield, but a school. And it is at this point that they abandon the role of victim and assume the role of observer. Alan Watts said that life is like a game, and the mistake is in taking it too seriously. When you understand this, the pressure disappears, the fear diminishes, and the heart becomes lighter. But not everyone will understand this change. People around you may think you've changed too much, that you're cold, distant, or even arrogant. But the opposite is happening. You've simply stopped getting involved in the same messes and dramas that used to consume you. You haven't lost your emotion. You've just stopped wasting it on things that aren't worthwhile. And that, deep down, is what bothers those who haven't yet awakened the most. That's why many awakened individuals naturally distance themselves from certain environments, people, and conversations. Not because they think they're better, but because they realize they no longer belong to that kind of energy. Now, I want you to tell me something in the comments. At what point in this process do you feel you are? Write the word awakening, so I know you're going through this transition too. This helps create a community of people who are living the same path as you, and who understand what this silent abandonment means. And speaking of letting go, there's something very specific that begins to happen when consciousness awakens, something that seems frightening at first, but is exactly what leads you to inner peace. That's what we'll talk about in the next part, because that's where you understand why true awakening begins when you lose control. When a person starts to lose control, and here I'm not talking about disorganization or weakness, it's because something within them has begun to align with a much larger flow. It's strange, I know. Spending your whole life trying to plan, predict, control, and suddenly feeling that nothing fits anymore. It seems like the end, but it's the beginning. Spiritually awakened people gradually discover that the need to control everything is one of the greatest illusions the ego has created. And letting go of that control isn't giving up on life. It's learning to truly live. Think about it. How many times have you tried to force something to work and only ended up frustrated? How many times has fear made you insist on things that were already wearing you down? Well, the ego hates the unpredictable, and awakening does exactly that. It messes everything up to show you that life was never meant to be controlled, but to be felt. Alan Watts said that we suffer because we try to hold the water with our hands, when the natural thing would be to learn to float. The awakened one understands this over time. They realize that the more they try to dominate the flow of life, the further they move away from their own peace. Of course, this process isn't easy. Control gives a false sense of security. We cling to routines, people, and situations, because we believe that in this way, everything will remain stable. But when consciousness begins to expand, life seems to do the opposite. It changes plans, cuts ties, abruptly alters the path. It's the universe pushing you to where you should be, not where you want it to be. The spiritually awakened person feels this strongly. First comes chaos, then clarity. First, they think they are losing everything. Then, they realize they were simply being guided out of the illusions they created. Have you ever experienced something like this? A phase where nothing made sense, but then you realized that everything was falling into place perfectly. Comment with the word flow, just so I know you understand what I'm saying. This is the point where the ego starts to lose ground, and the true self begins to take over. And when that happens, life starts to flow more naturally. Coincidences increase, worries decrease, and a confidence that's hard to explain emerges. It's as if something inside you is saying, "Cool, calm down, everything is all right." But this surrender doesn't happen all at once. The mind tries to resist. It will tell you that without control you will lose everything, that the world will crumble. But the awakened one learns over time that control is precisely what keeps them trapped. Alan Watts said that the secret of life lies in accepting uncertainty as part of the dance. And that's exactly it. Life is a constant dance between what you want and what you need to learn. When you stop fighting the rhythm, you begin to enjoy the movement. And the most curious thing is that when the awakened one lets go of control, things start to work out naturally. Opportunities appear, the right people arrive, and what seemed impossible begins to happen. Because when you trust the flow, you align yourself with the intelligence of life itself. Struggle becomes lightness, fear becomes faith, and anxiety gives way to presence. This is one of the greatest transformations that awakening brings. The realization that you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to listen to what life is trying to tell you. And that's where everything changes. Because after you understand that controlling is the same as resisting, something new begins to emerge. Detachment. And it is about this detachment, the abandonment of identities, labels, and the masks that the ego creates, that the next revelation comes. And when you understand this, you will realize that true power lies in being, not in seeming. When you start to let go of control, something interesting happens. The masks you use to protect yourself begin to fall. It's inevitable. The process of spiritual awakening forces you to face who you really are, without the disguise of the identities the world taught you to wear. The spiritually awakened person gradually realizes that they spent a good part of their life trying to fit into roles: the perfect child, the exemplary professional, the available friend, the ideal partner. All of this seems right at first, but one day it gets tiring, because behind these masks lies an enormous weight, the fear of not being accepted. And that fear, when you awaken to it, simply loses its meaning. You realize you've spent years trying to be what others expected of you, when in reality, you just needed to be yourself. That's why so many people, when they begin this process, feel a void. It's as if life ceases to make sense, and in a way, it does, because the old meaning, the one based on approval, status, and image, begins to crumble. Alan Watts said that the ego is a social fiction, a construct made to protect us, but which ends up imprisoning us. When you understand this, you begin to free yourself. This is the moment when the awakened one abandons labels. He stops defining himself by what he has, what he does, or what others say. He begins to realize that his value lies not in pleasing others, but in existing authentically. And that's when many things change. Forced conversations lose their meaning. Superficial relationships dissolve. The opinions of others cease to carry so much weight. The awakened one learns to say no without guilt and to distance himself from everything that diminishes him in order to fit into small spaces. But hold on, this detachment isn't arrogance, it's lucidity. It's the understanding that pretending is no longer an option. The awakened person understands that being honest with their own heart is more important than being accepted by others. They begin to question themselves, who would I be if I weren't afraid of disappointing anyone? And that's where freedom is born. True spiritual transformation doesn't happen when you try to be someone better, but when you stop trying to be someone you're not. And the curious thing is, the more you free yourself from masks, the more peace you feel. It's not a euphoric peace, it's a silent calm, the feeling of finally being at home within yourself. But this also comes at a price. Some people won't recognize the new version of you. They'll say you've changed, that you've become distant, that you're strange. And that's okay. The awakened one understands that not everyone will keep up with their pace, and that true love doesn't require disguises. Those who stay are the ones who see your essence, not your appearance. And in this process of abandoning identities, something even deeper happens. You discover that you are not just the self you thought you were, but part of something much bigger. You begin to feel that there is an intelligence guiding everything, that the universe is not against you, but shaping you into something higher. And when you reach this point, silence takes on a new meaning. It's not loneliness, it's connection. Because it is in this silence that the awakened one finds the answers that no words could explain. By the way, tell me something. Have you ever felt that need to step away in order to rediscover yourself, to stop pretending, and simply be yourself? Write the word in the comments. Essence. So I know you're going through this phase too. This exchange between those who are awakened makes all the difference, because it shows that no one is alone on this path, and that each detachment is, in fact, a reunion with one's own soul. And it is precisely at this point, when you allow yourself to be who you truly are, that something powerful emerges. Silence. Not that empty silence, but the silence that teaches you, that calms you, that connects you. That's what the next part is about. The moment when the awakened one understands that speaking less and listening more is the secret to living in peace in a world that shouts all the time. When a person awakens spiritually, they begin to perceive the power of silence. And it's not that uncomfortable silence of someone who has nothing to say. It's a silence that teaches, that heals, and that reveals truths that previously went unnoticed. At first, it may seem strange. You're used to always talking, justifying, explaining, answering. But over time, the awakened one understands that silence speaks much louder than 1,000 words. It is in silence that you begin to hear what truly matters, your own thoughts, your emotions, your intuitions. It is there, in the pause between one word and another, that wisdom resides. Alan Watts said that silence is the space where life happens. And it's true. When you are silent, the world regains its sound. The wind, the birds, the sound of your own breathing. Everything begins to gain meaning. And suddenly that constant noise of the mind, which is always trying to solve, control, and explain, begins to diminish. The awakened one discovers that silence is not emptiness, it is the place where the answers appear. He learns not to react to everything, not to get lost in useless discussions, to simply observe, and the more he observes, the more he understands. It's interesting because when you start practicing this kind of silence, many people don't understand. They think you're distant, cold, detached, but what they don't know is that you've simply stopped wasting energy on what doesn't matter. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to win every conversation, nor correct every mistake of others. The awakened one realizes that true strength lies in remaining at peace while the world tries to provoke you, and that is one of the greatest victories anyone can achieve. Silence also changes how you see others. Before, you reacted automatically to words, tone, and attitude. Now you observe. You understand that each person speaks from what they feel, what they carry, the wounds they have, and instead of judging, you begin to understand. It is at this point that the awakened one becomes a calm observer, someone who no longer engages in unnecessary conflicts, because deep down, they understand that those who shout are those who haven't yet found themselves. Those who have peace don't need loud noises. But the most beautiful thing of all is that silence also transforms your relationship with yourself. You begin to listen to your own soul, and the more you listen, the more you understand what it needs. Sometimes it's rest, sometimes it's forgiveness, sometimes it's simply being quiet to feel the present moment. This kind of listening is what is most lacking in the world today. We've become accustomed to living surrounded by noise, social media, opinions, information, constant noise, and we've forgotten to listen to what comes from within. The awakened one rediscovers this habit. He stops, breathes, and reconnects. Tell me something. Have you ever had a moment when you chose to stay quiet and felt that the silence gave you an answer? Write the word in the comments. Silence. So I know you understand the power of this. This exchange is important because it shows that each of us is learning to deal with the noise of the world in a more conscious way. And the most curious thing is that when you begin to live in this state of calm, something changes in your relationship with material things. What was once urgent now seems small. What once enchanted you now loses its appeal. And that's where the next step of awakening comes in. When you realize that the true value of life is not in having more, but in needing less. When you begin to live in silence, something inside you changes. Suddenly, the things that once gave you pleasure begin to lose their luster. Impulsive purchases, the pursuit of recognition, the obsession with status, all of this becomes dull. It's as if your perspective changes. What once impressed you now seems empty. Spiritually awakened people go through exactly this. Little by little, they detach themselves from materialism, not because they reject the world, but because they realize that the value of life has never been in things, but in how we live them. This detachment doesn't happen all at once. In the beginning, you still try to cling to small distractions, a new cell phone, a new outfit, a plan that seems promising. But you soon realize that none of that lasts. Material pleasure is quick and fleeting, a joy that comes and goes, leaving an even greater void. The awakened person understands this and begins to seek something deeper, a satisfaction that doesn't depend on possessing, but on being. Alan Watts said that life is not a problem to be solved, it's an experience to be lived. And that's exactly what changes everything. The awakened person stops chasing happiness and begins to realize that it has always been there, hidden in simplicity. And the more this awareness grows, the more the world around seems to run in the opposite direction. Everyone wanting more, buying more, showing off more. And you're there, realizing that true wealth is having peace. The awakened one begins to simplify life, reducing excesses, choosing better company, seeking experiences instead of things. They discover that what truly matters cannot be bought. The laughter of a loved one, the sunset, the smell of rain, the calm of a leisurely morning. Everything that is real is free, and everything that is expensive is usually fleeting. But be careful. This doesn't mean despising the material world. It means putting everything in its place. Spiritually awakened people continue working, studying, achieving, but now with a different purpose. They don't do it to prove anything, nor to fill an inner void. They do it because they love what they do. Money ceases to be an end and becomes a means. Vanity gives way to gratitude, and comparison loses its meaning, because the awakened understand that their path is unique. And that's where what many people call inner freedom emerges. The spiritually awakened person is no longer driven by fear or scarcity. They understand that the essentials are never lacking. And this confidence changes everything. Suddenly, you stop living waiting for the big moment and begin to value the present. The peace that once seemed so distant begins to reside within you. And when that happens, lightness arrives naturally. You stop running and start walking. You stop accumulating and start feeling. You stop pretending you have everything and finally recognize that you already have enough. Now I want to ask you something. Do you still feel trapped by something material that no longer brings you happiness? Write the word freedom. Leave a comment so I know you're in the process of letting go of what no longer serves you. This word carries a powerful energy because every time someone writes it, it becomes a collective reminder that detachment is the first step towards true abundance. And it is precisely at this point that awakening reaches its peak. When the awakened one abandons excess, noise and control, he discovers a new sensation, a lightness that no external achievement can provide. He understands that the greatest gift in life is life itself, and it is in this state that he begins to experience what many call enlightenment, not a light that comes from outside, but a clarity that is born within. It is the moment when he realizes that he never needed to chase happiness because it was always waiting for him in the simplest place, in the now. And it is from this clarity that true freedom is born, the freedom to be, to feel, to live, without needing to prove anything to anyone, the freedom to look at the world and understand that everything is exactly where it should be. That is why for those who awaken, life ceases to be a struggle and becomes a dance, and it is in this light and natural rhythm that the awakened follow the path, a path that, with each step, reveals new layers of existence, and shows that the greatest power that exists is being at peace with who you are. And ultimately, that's where the secret to everything you've heard so far lies. Because when the awakened one learns to live in this state of surrender and simplicity, they begin to perceive signs, small, synchronicities, coincidences, and moments when the universe seems to respond. And it is at this point that the journey changes completely. Now that you've made it this far, you can already feel how this content has opened your mind to something bigger. You understand that spiritual awakening isn't about escaping life, but about clearly seeing what truly matters, and that changes everything. This transformation begins from within, and the simple fact that you stayed until the end shows that something has already begun to move inside you. When the truth arrives, it doesn't go back, and that's why your presence here makes a difference. Just as this video helped you understand your own process, it can also help other people who are still lost, trying to understand what they are feeling. So like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how this message continues to reach those who also need to awaken. Leave the word in the comments. Wake up to confirm that this message has reached your soul. And pay attention, because the next video will take you even deeper down this path, where consciousness not only expands, but begins to create the reality that has always been waiting for you.